Bureaucracy. Number 1. Bureaucracy is a term we're all familiar with. We usually use it in a negative way to talk about a big, slow, usually government organization, although businesses suffer from this as well. The term is, however, important in sociology. Max Weber argues that bureaucratic institutions are a definitional aspect of modern society, and therefore important in understanding the experience of living in modern society, and particularly working in a bureaucratic institution. The term bureaucracy is an ideal type, and in fact it's often used as an illustration to help explain the concept of ideal type. Both bureaucracy and ideal type come from Max Weber. If you've watched the ideal type video, you'll know that an ideal type is a definitional construct that, while not perfectly representing reality, still helps us to understand social phenomena. So, in this case, with bureaucracy, Weber has several points that he argues are important in the definitional understanding of bureaucracy, even if no institution will ever have all of those points perfectly as Weber describes them. Now, the number 1 is here because there's a difficulty with understanding this word. Weber presented certain points in his original writings, but if you look at 101 textbooks, for example, at some of them you'll see maybe 3 points, some of as many as 9. The actual definition and what constitutes a bureaucracy is not always clear, or at least presented in different ways. In this video, number 1, I will present Weber's ideas the way he presents them in his original writings, or at least the translation of them. Bureaucracy number 2 will look at my summary of the things that I think are the most important aspect, as well as some of the pros and cons of bureaucracy, not democracy. Anyway, on to the first point. Bureaucracy number 1. Weber argues that a key aspect of bureaucracy, a key characteristic of every bureaucratic institution, is what he calls jurisdictional areas. This is similar to the idea of division of labor that we talked about in another video with concept. It's a concept from Emil Durkheim. But in any case, the basic idea is simply that if you go to work, go to a job, you have specific responsibilities that are assigned to you. You have a specific position with specific tasks. And the activities of any worker in a bureaucracy are a matter of official duty. So you have a job, that job comes with certain things you're supposed to do. The authority to complete that task itself really, is distributed according to rules and regulations. So in other words, in any job you work, there are very specific rules about what your job is and what your job is not, and you're expected to do your job and not interfere or do another person's job, and they're not expected not to come and do your job, right? So there's rules and regulations that shape the duties and activities of a worker in any particular position within a bureaucratic institution. The purpose of these regulations ultimately is efficiency. It's designed to help ensure the methodical and continuous fulfillment of duties. So you don't come to work one day and decide you're going to do one job, the next day you come and decide you want to do something else, the next day you come and decide you want to take a nap. There are very specific rule and regulation defined duties with each task, and you're expected to do those in an organized and continuous way. Bureaucracy number 2. The second concept that Weber talks about is what he calls office hierarchy. And he explains this by talking about what he calls official channels of appeal. The idea here is that in every organization, bureaucratic organization, there are layers of authority with higher power, lower power. And usually the higher powered offices supervise the lower power offices. What he means by a channel of appeal is if there's a problem between those organizations, there are specific rules and procedures, forms to fill out, or a specific department, HR, for example, that is for handling those kinds of disagreements. The different power levels associated with those different levels and the way those different levels interact with each other are all regulated by rules and regulations. As you'll see, rules and regulations are a key aspect in bureaucracies. Another idea that's associated with these different levels of power, is that the offices and positions exist independently of the individuals who occupy them. So, at the bottom line, if you quit your job, there's a position left there open and someone else will come in and fulfill that job. That job, so to speak, exists independently of you as an individual and your own personality. This also means that a higher authority can't simply take over a lower authority without following very specific procedures in place for that purpose. So bottom line, different levels of power governed by rules and regulations in their interactions and performance of their duties. Bureaucracy number 3. Management is based on written files, and this simply means that record keeping is an important part of modern bureaucracy. What happens on a day-to-day basis, what happened in the past, is not a matter of memory, but written documents. We often talk about the paper trail and trying to figure out a problem, for example, at work. And in many modern bureaucracies, one of the interesting characteristics is that there is a large number of staff devoted solely to record keeping. Their job, their reason for being in that place, is record keeping. And even people that have other duties separate from record keeping, they still spend a lot of their time keeping records. This last point, these 2 points here, are kind of interesting. It's a little bit odd. Bureaucracy, Weber talks about bureaucracy when he defines it. He introduces this point, this number 3 point about written documents. And then in that same section of his writing, he adds these other ideas that don't seem to connect. And sometimes these are presented as separate ideas, but we're trying to stick with Weber here. In any case, the idea is that work is separate from private life. This is exemplified by the difference between personal and company or agency property. So when you go to a job, you go to your office, you have a computer and a desk and a stapler and pens and a copy machine and all these things. They're company property. You're expected to use them to fulfill your assigned duties, but you're not allowed to take them home, and you may not be allowed to use them for personal purposes, such as shopping online, for example. In any case, Weber adds this as an important distinction between previous ways of organizing companies where private property and company property was the same. Bureaucracy number 4, training. We talked about this idea of specific duties and responsibilities and offices within an organization. The basic idea here is that people who occupy those offices have skills, specialized training that are associated with the duties of that office. So you're not hired because you're the friend, ideally, or because the king is loyal to you or some other reason like that. You're hired purely based on merit and ability. Thus, many companies have exams, right? The civil service examinations for government work are a good example of this. They began in China, were adopted by the British, and have spread around the world in civil service. The idea of the resume, again with record keeping, a history of your abilities, your experiences, so on and so forth. And of course, the curriculum vitae is the same thing. Bureaucracy number 5. A bureaucracy demands what Weber calls the full working capacity of the official. What this means simply is that when you go to work, you are at work and expected to do work things only. Further, the position you occupy is not just a job or something that you do every once in a while. It is a career, and usually your life is kind of built around that. We're talking about full-time employment, a very regulated workday, when you clock in, when you clock out, and a specific retirement system. You retire at a certain age, so on and so forth. Weber contrasts this to historical periods where, a king, for example, might do kingly duties sometimes, but might spend a lot of the time doing other things. And he suggests that the official job of an official in a government would often come second to other endeavors. In a bureaucracy, the career path is the most important thing, or is the first thing. Bureaucracy number 6, this is the last one, and the idea here, again, rules and regulations. Weber argues that bureaucracies are governed by what he calls general rules. This means they're more or less stable and therefore learnable. The rule doesn't change, hopefully, every day when you come to work. The boss has a new set of rules, a new whim that he expects you to follow, right? With a king, an absolute ruler, some kind of tyrant or a monarch, the rules may change on a day-to-day basis based on the mood of the ruler. Someone in favor one day may be out of favor the next. To aid in this process, and again the idea of written documents, there are policy manuals. The rules are written down. Often the training associated with working a job is associated with learning those rules. The activities of the bureaucracy are managed by abstract laws and rules rather than by direct decree. So if you imagine a king back in the Middle Ages or something, they might issue a decree that such and such should be done, should be accomplished by a certain date, and then it's done and over and whatever else. A bureaucracy is an institution that is given a mission statement or a mandate, and then in the abstract, and then they go out and fulfill that through the offices and duties and rules and regulations of the bureaucratic institution. Anyway, those are the main points, according to Weber, as he presents them for the ideal type of the bureaucracy. Take a look at bureaucracy number 2, and you'll get a feel for some of the pros and cons of bureaucracy, as well as what I think is a maybe more modern summary of bureaucratic institutions and characteristics. Thanks for watching.